Thank you. So beautiful. All right, we have to use big voices out here, I guess. So I can't be quiet. Just about all of you know me. I'm Gillian. I am Dick's first child, eldest daughter, only son. My father was an adventurer, an explorer. He had boundless curiosity. I will always hear my father's voice saying, "There's a whole little world in there. It's a whole little world." He loved finding new places and new people and exploring. And he gave me that love of adventure and exploration and seeing what there was in the world. He gave me his love of language and skill for writing. He gave me a love of theater and skill at acting and directing and producing. He gave me his love of history and the curiosity to know what people's lives were like in other times and what it was like to be there. And thanks to his curiosity and his becoming associated with the Renaissance Fair and other things that involved history and language and theater and so on, it certainly impacted my life in a great way. All those things that my father gave me, they influenced my life profoundly. Before he had a stroke 6 years ago, he had seemingly endless energy too. When we went to Italy in 2010, he ran me off my feet all over Rome and Florence and Tuscany. And when we were in Spain in 2003, the same thing. He just wanted to keep going, and we went to concerts all over Rome, and we did all kinds of great stuff. Now, my father always expected he would drop dead of a heart attack. None of us get to pick our own fate, of course, but that was a reasonable assumption. His beloved younger brother, Bob, my cousin's father, died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 64. Their father, grandfather, grandmother, great-grandfather, probably further back, all died of heart attacks or heart disease. Most of them at young ages, most of them very suddenly, all of them at much younger ages than the age that Dick got to. So that's what he thought. So it was a cruel and grotesque irony that instead of going out like that 6 years ago, he had a stroke that left him hemiplegic with no use of his right arm, little use of his right leg, unable to play music, unable to dance, unable to walk pretty much, unable to get out of the house on his own, unable to drive, unable to do much of anything on his own. It was torture for him. It really was. I moved in to take care of him, and I was glad to be there, but he hated being so dependent. One night early on, he was sitting on the edge of his bed crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I hate what I'm doing to your life." And I told him I was happy to be there, and I was happy to be there. I wouldn't for the world have said, "You go live in an institution" or something. So it was good. And not long before he died, I told him that it was my mission to keep him safe and comfortable and as happy as he could be, as happy as was within my power. And he said, "You've done what you can to make it tolerable." And that's really what it was. Not that he was blaming me. It's just that's what his life was. Now, we had some good times together. We had some really good, quiet times at home and small adventures here. We took on some massive adventures that were a little overwhelming. We went to England in 2016. We went on a Mississippi River cruise a few years ago. We went on a Mediterranean cruise last September with a week in London. My God, it nearly killed both of us, I think. I mean, traveling was, there were some good times, but traveling was exhausting and difficult for him in that situation. And his life would never be the same, and he knew it. On Wednesday, September 2nd, the day before all this stuff started, at breakfast he was sitting there with his brow furrowed, and I said, "What's wrong? You look worried." And he just looked at me with utter despair and said, "I'm never going to get out of this." Now, in Hamlet, as many of you know, in fact, at least one of you has played Hamlet here, when Laertes challenges Hamlet to a duel, Horatio, Hamlet's friend Horatio, doesn't want him to do it. He is afraid Laertes is going to kill Hamlet, as in fact happens. I hope that's not a spoiler for too many people. But Hamlet says, "If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all." Dick was ready. He had been ready for some time to be free of his poor damaged body that had betrayed him so badly. When the doctors came into the ER and told us that this CAT scan showed that there was a rupture in the ventricles, between the ventricles of his heart, and there wasn't anything they could do about it, and his heart wasn't pumping much, I asked how long, and of course they hem and haw, but finally they said not long, a few days. And Dick said, "I'm going to die in a few days." And he didn't say it as if he were thinking, "Oh my God, I'm going to die in a few days." He said it as if he were thinking, "It will be now." He was ready for it. He just wanted to go home, and thank God the doctors agreed that having him comfortable at home was the best thing. They got an ambulance to take him home as quickly as could be arranged that night, and the next day they got a hospital bed and a hospice nurse, and we had drugs to keep him comfortable. And the next day, that Friday, so many family and friends came and called and told him they loved him and how much he had meant to them, and that was just fantastic. It was a gift to have that. But after everybody had gone away in the early evening, he was just exhausted. And I sat and read to him for a little while, and about 9 I asked if he wanted to go to sleep, and he did. So I gave him his usual sleeping pills, and he still couldn't really get to sleep. We were still waiting for some more medicine to come. So finally it came about 10 o'clock, and I got him more medication, and he was finally starting to become relaxed and starting to get drowsy. Now his cat Tiffany usually slept on his chest, and she wasn't there at that moment. And when that happened, if he got in bed and the cat wasn't there, I would usually say, "Shall I go find her?" And he'd say, "No, she'll come," wagging her tail behind her. So that night, as he was starting to drop off, I said, "Shall I get Tiffany?" And he said, "No, she'll come," wagging her tail behind her. And he closed his eyes, and he wasn't conscious again, by choice, I am sure. The next afternoon, he opened his eyes just for a couple seconds. I was sitting next to him, and he opened his eyes, and he looked at me, and then he closed his eyes again. And that night, he began to die actively, and Anne and I were there, and Tiffany was on his chest for much of the time, so she was a good loyal girl. And the hospice nurse came about midnight to help us a little bit, and he breathed his last at about 9:14 the next morning, and that was it. And it was hard, and I'm sad, and I miss him so much, but he will always be right here. And I know that he is finally free. I forgot to say before that when the doctors had gone away and left us sitting there, I was crying and I was holding his hand, and I asked if he was afraid. And he said no. He said no. He was ready to go. So I would like to close with something from Cymbeline, which has become traditional at the funerals of actors. So I'm going to hold him here. Fear no more the heat of the sun, nor the furious winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, home art gone, and ta'en thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers, come to dust. Fear no more the frown of the great, thou art past the tyrant's stroke. Care no more to clothe and eat, to thee the reed is as the oak. The scepter, learning, physic must as all follow this and come to dust. Fear no more the lightning flash, nor the old dreaded thunderstone. Fear not slander, censure rash. Thou hast finished joy and moan. All lovers young, all lovers must consign to thee and come to dust. No exerciser harm thee, nor no witchcraft charm thee. Ghost unlaid forbear thee, nothing ill come near thee. Quiet consummation have, and renowned be thy grave.
Most of you know me. I'm Rachel, number 2 daughter. Over the last 5 years or so, I spent a lot of time with my dad. Mostly I came on Friday afternoons. Almost always we watched a movie or 2 or 3. Gradually we built a routine. I'd show up with lunch, often a roast beef sandwich for him, extra mayo, no mustard, white bread, often a little medicinal something or other to lighten the mood. Dick would usually ask as soon as I got there, "Did you bring a J?" And for a long time I had. I think I need to put on my reading glasses. Fridays usually involved stopping at the Pot Club on the way to McGee Street, and then usually at Cedar Market, often to get an Eskimo pie or one of those paper-wrapped ice cream cones. For a while we had a pretty good thing going, and the drugs, as he called them, relaxed him. The highlight of that period was 4/20/2018. That's the day I got these glasses. The Pot Club always celebrated 4/20, and that year they had a big party, no pandemic. Everyone in line, passing joints up and down. When I told them I was there to get supplies to celebrate 4/20 with my dad, they gave me the best swag. The best glasses, a free t-shirt, and a 10% senior discount. You've probably seen the photo I took that day. It's a selfie with my dad. The coal is burning. He's wreathed in smoke. It's here on the slideshow. You can have a look. My son Francis put the slideshow together. Thank you very much. Gradually, Dick's breathing began to fail, so we had to stop smoking, and I began experimenting with cannabis edibles for him. There were mints, gummies, chocolate-covered espresso beans, which proved to be hit or miss. One week he'd ask for a box of mints and I'd bring it, and I'd give him one and observe the results before I left. The next week he'd tell me he took 5 or 6 of those little fuckers and they didn't do anything. Next week he'd tell me he'd taken one and it knocked him off his ass, made me take it away. After a while I discovered the drinks, cold brew cannabis coffee, little tiny cans of grapefruit pot soda. He claimed he liked the flavor but felt no effect. But I noticed that when he drank the soda, he'd also eat the whole sandwich and watch the whole movie. Which brings me to the movies. Over the last 5 years, I watched more than I think I had in the past 25. I was always on the hunt for something that I wanted to watch that I thought he would like too, which was not an easy task, especially when you go down the closed captioning rabbit hole, or he couldn't find his hearing aid. Our taste did not overlap much. Dick's requests were often bleak historic dramas or contemporary emotional train wrecks. I prefer comedies. But I did manage some good picks, and sometimes I cheated. Knowing a movie he'd really liked a few months earlier, I could probably recycle and he'd never know the difference. So we had the Bruce Lee phase, and that led to the Jackie Chan phase. And that took us through the Ocean's 8 through 11 phase. Then I got the idea to watch all 26 007 movies. We watched Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, of course Octopussy. James Bond led to Indiana Jones, and that led to Cheech and Chong. Over the last year, he made specific requests that must have spanned the time zones in his mind. We went from the African Queen to Gone with the Wind, the original King Kong, Angels in America, Apollo 13, and Shaun the Sheep. Sometimes I would doze off, but never Dick. He kept up his coffee habit to the bitter end. I'll always remember some of the things my dad said to me during those long hours. Things like, "You have to point the device at the machine, Rachel, if you want to change the station." Or, "Would you make your old pa another cup of joe?" My favorite was, did I ever tell you that when I was in college, I had a white blazer? This was usually after a James Bond movie. And every time he told me that, I'd say, "Really? When would you wear that?" And then he'd tell me about dinners with the fraternity and how every college man had a white blazer in the closet back then. But after a minute or two, he would peter out. The effort of trying to bridge the gap between those good old days and his current situation was too much, maybe. Or the hearing problem was too great. Eventually, the last movie would end. I'd make him a final cup of coffee and head back out into the real, rotten world. Such a contrast from the house on McGee that seemed to be a bubble unto itself. The last movie I watched with him was Humphrey Bogart's Beat the Devil, 1953. What a long, strange trip it's been, Dick. I think we can all agree you left the world just a little bit stranger than when you found it.
I'm glad y'all can be here. I'm Jennifer, Dick's youngest daughter. And I have a poem that a family friend sent me, which is beautiful. "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools, this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing to love, what death has touched." I think we all know that my dad was a really awesome guy. And I'm just glad that he was who he was, because he has made our lives dramatic and creative and artistic and wonderful and joyous and really unique. And I'm really glad he wasn't an accountant or something like that. I'm very glad that my dad was who he was, and we are all better for him.
Cut the distance here a little bit so we can. I couldn't play with one hand.
No, I can stand there and hold her a hat. Would you like a hat?
Oh, the sun is highly become, and the trees are sweetly turning, and the wild mountain thyme goes around the blooming heather. It is so happy go, and we'll all go together to the wild mountain thyme, all around the blooming heather. It is so I will give my love a bower by yon clear crystal fountain, and on it I will pile all the flowers of the mountain. And we'll all go together to the wild mountain thyme, all around the blooming I'll sing now. And we'll all go together to the wild mountain thyme, all around the blooming heather. If my true love will not come, I will surely find another to the wild mountain thyme, all around the purple heather. Will you and we'll all go together to the wild mountain thyme, all around the blooming heather. And we'll all go together to the wild mountain thyme, all around the blooming heather.
Well, I know many of you, but I'm not sure all of you. My name is Anne. I think I know most of you folks. I was privileged to share part of Dick's life with him, and I have a few things to say. Mostly a celebration of a lot of good things. Dick and I met in the spring of 1991 outside of middle school in Palo Alto. We were just two people who were early for a Border Morris workshop, which is a dance form. And I didn't think very much about it until about a week and a half later. He showed up at an English dance, and after it was over, he asked me to go out with him. And I said something along the lines of, well, I'll try almost anything once. This was typical of my attempts at being coy. My best flirting did not involve words. Dick was my love, friend, kobozo, husband, teacher, cat paw, and finally friend for life. He shared many wonderful things with me, including his family, his home, and his many, many interests. But what surfaces now at Journey's End was the incandescent glow of his love in those first weeks, months, years, and how it continued to burn all that time. I had never been courted with such enthusiasm and romantic flair, certainly. He was always better at that sort of thing than I was. In fact, it wasn't until much later, after our marriage and our relationship had gone into its third decade or so, that I really truly realized how much he had given of himself. Don't it always seem to go? In case nobody has said this yet, and I'm not sure anybody has, Dick was a really funny guy. He was a gas. I was new at Morris dancing. My side Fool's Choice danced on May Day mornings at the Baylands in Palo Alto, and his team, Deer Creek Morris, danced there as well. He was their fool, and he cavorted most riotous and ribald, introducing his pal, Ralph, the rubber chicken, to all onlookers. He nicked one of my pairs of red underwear for one of his hankies. He also used to hand it to anybody on the side who dropped one of theirs. My parents first met him at a Morris event in full regalia. He had the top hat with his foxtail and a long leather patchwork vest that was studded with little mirrors and flowers all over his hat and his little striped tabor, and his face was painted black and green. Mom, Dad, this is the guy I've been telling you about. By then I had started telling people that I had put the Fool's Choice in Fool's Choice, which was the name of my Morris team. And he said being together made his corpuscles dance. Buddhism was the only religious practice either of us ever engaged in. We were married at our local Zendo in January of 1995, and I think we have one of the better parties I've been to. Dick and my dad really liked each other, and I know my father and mother were both proud and happy. At the time, he was working mostly as a walk-around entertainer at various fairs and festivals. He was Will Kemp, he was the Pied Piper. If it was Oktoberfest, he was der Rattenfanger. Sometimes he was Appleseed John, Mardi Gras Conjure Man, even a 4th of July Uncle Sam. I helped him with all the costuming, the little bits. But when something, he was on the road a lot, but when a crisis broke, he was always there. Through my father's passing, my mother's illnesses and accidents, he would come back east with me, always the steady and helpful guy. Being a natural fool, Dick brought a wonderful spirit of play to domestic life. He was a very playful guy, and it was very good for both of us. He liked making up nicknames for his home, his cast of characters, and our little rituals. His house was Piper HQ. When I moved in, it became for a time Nesto Fools. When we adopted a pair of rough and tumble tabby fur balls, he proclaimed them the pride of McGee. Thereafter, whatever combination of cats and people lived in the house was known as the Pride. He joined me in on the songs that I like to make up to sing to and with the cats. These were called the songs of varmintry. One day, when we were in SF, getting lost, disagreeing about where to eat, bumping into each other on the sidewalk, he suddenly quipped, "Los dos bozos do San Francisco." And we were Los dos bozos from then on. When we were done with an outing or a trip, it was always back to hearth and cats. If we had a disagreement, difference of opinion, a lot of times the best way to settle it was, "What you want about? Big sloppy kiss?" Dick saw and encouraged things in me that I never would have seen in myself, mostly around performing. He pulled me into play readings, doing a short story at the Berkeley City Club event. We also did a reading at the club from Archie and Mehitable, for which Ellen Hoffman very graciously played incidental music. He gave me his jester outfit and a broom for a weekend Ren fair, and Cuthbert the Apprentice Fool was born. Cuthbert had a meteoric career as Will Kemp's goofy and erratic sidekick through a number of events. As Squire, he recruited me very hard for the Deer Creek Morris dancers because, as he said, Sarah passed the physical quite some time ago. They used to be called the Deer Creek Morris men. And even though I would be whacked and demoralized from my job, he would say, "Come on, you can do this. Just show up to the Rockridge BART station. Meet me there." He would get me to practice, which was always a good thing, as it turned out. And he encouraged me to start playing music again, which I hadn't done much since I was a teen. And an aside about music here, some people are really naturally gifted and learn music easily, or at least it seems so to a lot of us. I think Dick and I were both the kind that really had to work at it, and he did. Despite the fact that he had kind of a late start in life and no support from his family, despite the fact that his father was apparently a fine pianist, he got quite capable at the pipe and tabor. He played modern and Baroque flute. He tried his hands at some more exotic things like Andy and panpipes. I was not competent to accompany him in those realms, but eventually I took up the button accordion, which is common for Morris dancing, and whenever he heard me play, he would always say, "See, you're gaining on it." The pipe and tabor seemed a little daunting to me, but perhaps now that I'm retired, it's not too late. I have the tutor in hand, since he wrote the book. Being a wind player, Dick was very fond and a big fan of all things that went fweet, and loved the harmless birds of song and story. He made up school programs for kids around birdsong, the music it inspires, making the instruments that people made to sound like the birds. He was recruited by his friend Lee McRae for the Music Discovery Program, a summer program from the Early Music Society of San Francisco for kids, and they always produced a comic play every year. He created Commedia dell'arte plays for them, with all of the stock characters, Pantalone, Scaramouche, Colombina, Il Dottore. They had a blast. I know at some point along the line he decided to retire, but I don't really remember what that meant, other than maybe that he stopped traveling to fairs. He was just always doing stuff. In 2001, with 9/11 and many things in my life unraveling, I did leave the house at McGee, and it became once again Piper HQ. I took on a more separate life, but we never drifted far apart. We sang in the Rebels Chorus in 2001. He helped me move into my first apartment in 2002. We kept on doing things together. And I'm so glad that we reconciled and stayed friends. I hope you won't mind if I relate a sort of telling scene from before our separation. I was struggling with depression a lot some of the time. And at one point, Dick attended a therapy session with me and a hospital psychiatrist. There was a certain amount of back and forth. And then at the end of the session, the doctor said, "Well, it does seem like you two really do love each other, which is more than I can say for a lot of the couples I meet." And that was kind of how it was. It just wouldn't break. So we were on some kind of common astral plane. In Dick's last years, we still managed to share some good times, and I hope that I gave him a bit of relief in his durance vial. I always wished I knew how to do more. It was heartbreaking to see him feeling so much less than his whole self. When they unloaded him from the ambulance on his last trip home, he still greeted me with, "Hey, bozo." Once he was settled, I tried to tell him how, after nearly 30 years of knowing him and learning about his life, I was really just getting to understand how much what we had together had meant to him and to me. And he just looked at me and said, "You were the love of my life." I will probably never be loved like that again. And I promise to remember the good times. He was very calm that night. He awaited the end patiently, glad to be back with hearth and cats and family. I was going to read something from this, but I think I won't take the time now. But I did want to leave you with something from a song from Steve Goodman that Dick enjoyed a great deal. It was about a mandolin player named Carl Martin, who really, as Steve said, knew how to make the good times roll when the rest of us weren't so sure. And the last verse of the song ends with, "You want to be someone, you got to have some fun, and you got to get it while you can." Thank you, Dick.
I'm Carla Winter. I have a company called CW Entertainment, also known as Party Art. Dick Bagwell was one of my fine entertainers, and we worked lots of events together. We initially met about 35 years ago. It was a grand opening of a toy museum in San Francisco, and he was hired to be the Pied Piper, and I was hired to be Wonder Woman. And even though I'm an entertainer, I tend to be kind of shy, passive when I'm not being an entertainer. I'll be on the outside part of the room and being quiet. You know, and that little Pied Piper, he came out and he just drew me out of my shell. And we had a great time, and we had a great show. And I even met the original creator of Wonder Woman, who jumped into my arms for a photo op immediately. Anyway, Dick and I had an instantaneous chemistry, and I booked him for many years at malls and festivals and walk-around kinds of things, and got to know all his characters, and we became friends. And we were just friends in the best of ways, friends united in our love of the arts. And what I love about this special friend, well, I'm busy kind of hiding in my corner, and as Julian said, her dad was a dad of adventure. That man took me on adventures. We went to museums, we went to concerts, we just did all sorts of things, and some of them were like just the finest, wonderful details, and others were, that was about the worst, most wonderful thing I've ever experienced. So it was always a very broad experience, and so rich and so full. And when he had a stroke, I remember that horrible phone call from Julian, and the life-changing moment on that, and how many years that went on. And I went to see him as regularly as I could, and then COVID kicked in. But I still got there for his birthday. We still shared some treats there. And I have to admit, he was ready, and it's been just an absolutely exquisite life transition to this beautiful expression here. And my admiration for Julian particularly, the 100% dedication and devotion that she went the whole 9 yards for her dad, and it's setting the bar high for myself, who has her own caregiving opportunity now too. Dick Bagwell was my friend. I loved him dearly, and I'll love him forever. And I miss his presence, and I'm so relieved he's moving on to the next level, but just a little bit at a time. Even the day that he left his body, when I got there was still so much life energy in that body, as he was savoring every moment on earth.
By 1592, Will Kemp was one of Lord Strange's men, listed in the Privy Council authorization of that troop to play 7 miles out of London. In 1594, upon the dissolution of Strange's men, Kemp, along with Richard Burbage and some upstart named William Shakespeare, joined the Lord Chamberlain's men and remained with that company until 1599. After his departure from Chamberlain's, Kemp continued to pursue his career as a performer. He undertook what he would later call his 9 days' wander, in which he Morris danced from London to Norwich, a distance of 110 miles, a journey which took him 9 days spread over several weeks, often amid cheering crowds. Later that year, he published a description of the event to prove doubters that it was actually true. In his time, Kemp was as famous for his stage jigs as for his acting in regular drama. The jig, a kind of rustic cousin to Commedia dell'arte, featured as many as 5 performers in a partially improvised song and dance routine. Jigs had plots, often bawdy, but the emphasis was on dancing and physical comedy. Dick made me tell you that. My name is Kevin Patterson, and we are here in the 21st century, not the 16th century, to talk about one Richard Bagwell. Remembering the friendships and camaraderie, the inspired connection to history that lit a fire in this man, Dick Bagwell, the man, the myth, the legend. He magically became his chosen character, Will Kemp. And now he is capering down the pathway, the country lane in our hearts, with his fife and tabor and Morris bells. As Will Kemp was his icon, Dick Bagwell is now ours. Kemp represented to him the very spirit of celebration and intellect, wit, wisdom, and foolery that Dick's memory will now evoke for all of us. The Living History Center, born of the shared magic we know as the Renaissance Pleasure Fair, presented the perfect alchemy for Dick to express his wizardry. He saw potential and brought it into being. Dick's magic wand was the pen. With it, he conjured from grants from the NEH that funded a fabulous folk music festival, created educational programs, and put in words the techniques of learning we were all just doing at the Renaissance Fair. Dick was a masterful writer, evoking for all of us the most eloquent and insightful vision of our shared experience of counterculture delight we called the Pleasure Fair. Here is a taste of the wonderful writing he did in the 1977 color album. Behold, a country seasonal fair of Tudor times, a gay pattern of bright rustic booths, tents, and stages, banners rippling in the warm breeze spread across 12 acres. The surrounding gentle hills reveal no sign of the 20th century. It is banished, along with dull care and everyday concerns. And the 16th century and its revels holds forth in this rustic seat. Come closer now and see the pleasantly bustling marketplace and fairways thronged with thousands of merry fair folk in old English costume. A fool in motley in the forest. He capers mongst the throng, leaving eddies of movement and laughter behind him. Huzzah breaks from 1,000 throats, a skirl of pipes and drums, a procession of great figures, hobby horses, Morris dancers, musicians, and happy, prancing children winds towards a thatched and timbered stage through sounds of ringing market bells. Thank you, Dick. During his years with the Living History Center, Dick's leadership as its education director, I think perhaps his masterpiece was a creation known as Workshop in the Woods, where he took rustic, forested environs of the Renaissance village and turned the quiet weekday into the perfect outdoor classroom, a laboratory of living history with song and dance and color and art, where every young student and every talented and joyful teacher was in costume and in character. Dick Bagwell was the education director for the Living History Center from 1973 to 1979. He and my parents, Ron and Phyllis Patterson, were activists, cultural revolutionaries who saw new ways to teach, getting children of all ages on their feet, expressing themselves through culture, theater, art, and history, all in a forested setting. And they were passionately devoted to making it happen for as many fertile minds as possible. I believe Dick Bagwell devoted his entire life to this passion for living history. Years and years of unbridled creativity, hard work, living communally, traveling around the country and the world, making magnificent, melodious, magical moments that create lifelong memories, and perhaps change the world even just a bit for the better. The thousands of school-age children who were inspired to be more creatively connected adults, some who even chose to become teachers. That wizardry, that was Dick Bagwell's passion for history and folklore and learning, inspired us all. The days of dancing a merry caper down the winding pathways of a country lane are now part of our folklore, and our Will Kemp is Dick Bagwell. In our hearts, the legend and the love of life and learning that Dick inspired will live on.
My name is David Parr. It's wonderful and strange the way that fate can weave together our life paths. It was 1977, maybe 1978, and I was walking down a path at a Renaissance fair up there, and I heard a strange piece of music being played, and I looked over and there was an affable fellow in a very striking costume sitting there cranking what I later learned was a hurdy-gurdy. And I stopped and listened to it for a little bit, and I said, well, you know, you grinding coffee? What's going on there? And he came over and he said, let me show you how this works. And he spent a lot of time with me showing how the tunes to be played and the drones and all that kind of stuff, and maybe even giving me a chance to turn the crank a time or two myself and try my hand at the hurdy-gurdy. 40 years later, I found myself standing on a stage in San Francisco wearing a turban and jabala and singing in an opera composed by my hurdy-gurdy man many years before. And in those intervening years, I spent many, many years dancing with him in the Deer Creek Morris Company, of course, which he served so well as squire for many years. But the episode I want to focus on happened in between there. And that was in 2003 when the Christmas Revels, which until recently I was the director for, was doing an Elizabethan show. And the theme of the show was Will Kemp's 9 Days Wonder, the journey to Norfolk. Thank you, Kevin, for saving me the exposition on this one. As it turned out, though, even though Will Kemp was, of course, Dick's signature character, we had already engaged Jeff Coyle to play that role. But we needed somebody to play Thomas Sly, who was the pipe and tabor player who accompanied Kemp on that journey, and there stood Dick ready to fill in that role. And he later repeated the role when the show itself is repeated in Cambridge, or in Portland the following year. But it really struck me that there was no sense in Dick that this should have been his role to do Will Kemp. He was willing to pitch in and do whatever would make for a good show, and his services were invaluable. His participation was priceless. In the theater, we have a term, we call it ensemble player. It's an honorific. My friend, the late great Leo Downey, once turned to me across the dressing table and said in his inimitable Boston accent, "You know, Dave, what an ensemble player is, that's a guy who works as hard for your moment as he does for his own." And that's exactly right. And Dick was a true ensemble player, both in his life on stage and on the stage that is life. And we're all the better for the knowing of him.
I'm Ray Tatter, and I want to say that when I came, I was about to come this morning, I went over to my theater and let a company in, and they asked me why I was dressed in black, and I said I was going to go to a memorial. And one of the actors piped up and said, "You're going to a memorial. Well, you should feel blessed, Ray. You're still here." And I looked at him and I said, "I feel twice blessed if my friend was here." It was a moment of craziness. I barely got home. I got in the car with Susan and we drove here. And I thought as I was coming here how precious every moment is and how precious all of the things that we did together. Dick and Beth, I worked with them at the Renaissance Pleasure Fair. They ran the Living History Center, and I was the entertainment coordinator. In the early 70s, we worked together on a number of projects. In the middle of the fair days, they ran something called the Workshop in the Woods. It was an Elizabethan country school, and I played the Magister Ludi and taught kids how, when they came to the fair, how to use a horn book, how to make a quill and write with that quill, and they got to take the quill home. And it was a really interesting time because there were a lot of other entertainments that came along. And into my Elizabethan schoolhouse came Sir Francis Drake, one of the actors on stage during the Renaissance Fair, and he told the kids all about the Armada and how he beat the Armada back to Spain. And then he also talked about how he later discovered a place on the western side of the new continent and called it Nova Albion, which is right over there. Oh. I guess that the most important thing was that one year we were taken into a meeting, and Phyllis Patterson said that we had to open on Easter, and we didn't know what to do. That's not so good. Phyllis says, "Yes, we'll make it good." And so she said, "Ray, I want you and and Dick to find me a passion play and put it on." I said, "Okay," and we kind of gritted our teeth because we knew that the British passion plays, all of the passion plays that were done were really boring. Really boring. And so we didn't know what to do, but we went out, and Beth Bagwell was outside, and she said, "We'll use our researchers with them. We'll find something. There's got to be a funny passion play out there somewhere." And in about a week, we got a script. It was a small play from a German town called Redenten, we looked at the script and we just, I mean, it took us about 10 minutes to say, yes, we're going to do this play. And it was exciting because the play, if you knew the southern fair site, when you came in the front of it, about maybe 50 yards down the hill was a stage. And then another block or so, there was another stage. And then if you moved through across a bridge, there was the main stage, and the main stage was kind of two-story. And we thought, wow, this is really great because we can move the audience like they did in the medieval times. They didn't change scenery on stage then. So we were being good about that. And so we got the play together. Dick helped me cast the play because he and Beth had been working beforehand, and we cast some very wonderful comedic people, like if there's any fair people here, like Dundee. Dundee was the character that led the audience from stage to stage, and the first stage was, of course, the pilot's court, where he sentenced Christ to death. And they didn't do, as they do in a lot of other plays, show you the crucifixion, but we went on down to the rising from the grave, and that was a wonderful scene. And then we went to the mouth of hell. Phyllis had a hell mouth built that was, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 feet high. And the devils that guarded it stuck their heads out of little holes. It was fabulous, and we enjoyed doing it. And the casting was so well done. Phyllis said, "Well, look, oh, this is so good. Why don't we just do it every Sunday throughout this entire fair?" And we all went, "Okay, we'll do it." Your parents were so creative, and they helped me through a lot during that period of time. And all I can say is I totally enjoyed working with both of them, and I miss both of them. Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to welcome anybody who would like to come and speak your reminiscence of Dick. First of all, I do want to say, as many of you know, I was freaking out about the possibility of rain, and I spent a great deal of time and effort and money. I ordered 3 rain canopies and went and picked them up in Fremont, and we didn't bring them and set them up because there was supposed to be no rain today. But anyway, so I hope you haven't suffered too much. And I'm so grateful to Deer Creek Morris for doing the horn dance, and for the and for the California Rebels for lending us the antlers and other bits, and all the people who came together to make that happen, and so on. So please, you're welcome to come. Rosemary.
I'm a little old lady born and raised in Edinburgh, Scotland during World War II. I'm 88 years young. I was 8 years old at the time of Dunkirk. I knew Dick Bagwell as a member of the Berkeley City Club. I was president there for 4 very difficult years, and I had my critics, some SOBs. But Dick Bagwell was always there for me and supported me. And I wanted to share with you this evening a card that he sent me and has been on the shelf in my kitchen ever since. It's well over about 15 years ago. And it's little Miss Muffet, sitting on her tuffet, eating her curds and whey. A great big spider sat down beside her and frightened Miss Tuffet away. And inside it said, "Madam, my hearty thanks for all you've done for our club, Dick." And that's been on the shelf in my kitchen ever since. I smile every time I look at it. Dick Bagwell was an optimist. He looked for the good things in life. He built the strengths on goodness. And I'm very grateful to have known him and to be with you all here today, honoring him and getting to know a lot more about him. And I'm glad he's here beside us, right here in this box, and I'll bet he's enjoying every moment of it. God rest his soul. Thank you.
I'm Jim Gasparini. I knew Dick from the Rebels, from the Elizabethan show, and I just thought I'd mention something, echoing what Gillian said at the very top of the memorial tonight about Dick's wide-ranging curiosity. We've heard quite a bit about his performance in Renaissance fair type things and so forth, but he and I shared a taste for weird experimental theater. And I don't know how we got into it. I think I was in a Goat Hall production at one point, and he was in the audience, and we got to know, oh, hey, we like this stuff. And so we fell into a pattern for a couple of years of going out to every couple times a year to some of the strangest stuff that San Francisco Bay Area has to offer. And even into his wheelchair years, sometimes Gillian would back him up into my little car with his wheelchair and necessaries, and we would go off to hear perform the West End Opera performance of Lulu in this fabulous wreck of the Oakland train station. That was a very memorable production. But the problem, of course, with experimental theater is that some experiments sometimes are great successes and sometimes they're not. And sometimes some of the things we saw were exceedingly tedious or juvenile or both. And I would make snarky remarks, but I don't recall Dick ever making that kind of comment. I mean, Dick, he was there, he respected whatever somebody's vision was, he respected it, and he would comment approvingly sometimes, and sometimes he would just make non-committal comments, but he was as Gillian said, a wide-ranging curiosity about the world was one of his distinguishing features. Thank you.
My name's Alan, and I met Dick in 1979. He was dancing with Berkeley Morris, and be that as it may, those people in that situation there with Berkeley Morris was exciting for me for 5 years, and I got to meet some other interesting people. Dick invited me over to his house a number of occasions, and we played music together in his kitchen with other members of the Berkeley Morris in the first place. Later on, it broke into different groups. But there was always a love of that music. In my life, I found Dick as a welcome presence. He encouraged me to stay with my playing, and I think as it went forward, by 2009 we were still playing music in his kitchen, and at one point early on he had asked me, well, do you have a band? Well, it came to pass eventually we had a band, so I was in Dick's band. And it was a pleasure to work with Dick on saxophone. Later on, when he took the sax back up, he played it in high school. He had been a friend of a number of people. He knew Chicago luminaries before coming out here. He told me where he had played in his high school band. W.C. Handy, it appeared. Dick went back a long way. He was 13 years my senior, and I can only say that there was a certain druid quality about Mr. Bagwell that anybody here who knew him would say that's true. I'm only here to say now that our band is going to play, and I hope that Dick is somewhere in our hearts and our memories as we go forward. I'd like to ask Ann Miller to come up, and Kate Nichols. We're going to do one piece that we did with Dick's band called Over the Hills and Far Away, which is taken from a thing called the Beggar's Opera. John Gay wrote that in probably the 1700s, sometime around then. The Beggar's Opera was redone later on as the Three-Penny Opera, but that's not important. What's important is that there was a beautiful piece from the original called Over the Hills and Far Away, and we'd like to play that for you.
Ellen, can I say something?
Yes.
I've known Dick for a little over 10 years, accompanying Alan in the kitchen, and I'm not a performer. And Dick was always pressing instruments into my hands. Try this. Do that. And I never would. So Dick, this one's for you.
Thank you very much. That was something he taught us to do. And I can only say, knowing Dick, knowing Mr. Bagwell, as a musician was a lot of fun. He was a lot of fun. He'll be missed. And, you know, he was a performer. All I can say is if you ever saw him act, I went up to the Marin Mountain Theater to see King Henry V, a Shakespearean play. And Dick had a spoken part in the play. The minute he came out and gave his line, you were immediately drawn in. I mean, and that was characteristic of him, as just the sort of an engaging guy he was, I think in real life. But you couldn't help but feel close to him when he came to you. There was a warmth about Dick. I'll always remember that.
Before we get to the parting glass, would anyone else like to say anything? I didn't want to cut anyone off without an opportunity. No? Okay.
Of all the money that e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Of all the comrades that e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away, and all the sweethearts that e'er I had, they'd wish me one more day to stay. But since it fell unto my lot that I should rise and you should not. I'll gently rise and softly call. Good night and joy be with you all.
If anyone would like to join in playing or singing or dancing, we'll play Lily Bolero in G.
I'm a man of few words. Well, yeah, I guess I'm the token stranger here. Fortunately, I'm accustomed to extemporaneous public speaking. So, I met Dick in theory around 1992 when I purchased his pipe and tabor tutor, which at that time came with a cassette. Remember cassettes? They're making a comeback. So, and then over the years passed, and I think I improved a little bit on the pipe and tabor. And I met a fellow named Miko Sloper, who is currently on the other side of the globe at this moment. But Miko's a good friend of Dick's and kept in touch with him and said, hey, if you're going on your RV tour of the American Southwest, why don't you stop at Stefan's place? He lives in Mesa, Arizona. And Dick showed up and we got together and jammed a little bit. I think there's a couple of YouTube videos of us playing, just kind of jamming together. I I think I made enough of an impression on Dick that after he had his stroke, a couple years after that, he called me and asked if I would be so kind as to continue publication of his tutor, which I have, and it is still in print, and I added a little introduction and updated the resources chapter, which still needs to be updated again. So it's an ongoing process. And it's fascinating, this connection. Looking at Dick's books, half of those books are in my library at home. And then his instruments in these plastic tubs, that's how I'm keeping a bunch of my miscellaneous instruments too. We seem to have a lot in common. And I was born a little too late to get to know him, but I feel honored to keep this tradition going. And being a teacher myself, it's kind of neat to see my students who are part of the millennial generation now continuing in their various ways as well. So, thank you.
But we have food, a lot of food and a lot of drink, and we have, so please come do that and socialize, and those of you who would like to come back to the house later are welcome to do so. But meanwhile, come have something to eat here.
Let me give you one final thought. The words of G.K. Chesterton. If seeds in the black earth can turn into beautiful roses, what may not the heart of man become in its journey to light? He will be the bright star in the skies for the Bagwell family tonight and forever.
Why are you doing
I don't have any other one to compare it to.
That's right. Maybe not. Yeah, really, exactly. Here, we'll uncover the whole thing.
Yeah, let's uncover all this.
Oh, how beautiful. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
We're going.
And now we, well, I don't know what to do, so we take it off, and it's just a way to bring it up. Okay. If you like. Yeah, it's a lovely. It gets tangled quite easily. So then, all right, we connect with this.
Wrap it around your shoulders.
Okay.
And Jan and I will give you a big hug.
Okay, on the other end. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Love you. Thank you. I'm so happy you came. And I'm so grateful. Yeah.
That's how I remember.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a kind of, all these different spin-offs.
They only did 113 years. Hooked up with Brenda and moved to the other side of town, and everybody got busy. Always felt welcome, though. Big things.
Okay. Well, we wrap other whatever you want. Here, wrap up it.
I don't remember.
Hi, Sarah.
I went through all my stuff. You're eating one or two of them. Yeah, that looks like the back room that what used to be here in the jewelry, right? Yeah, and this food photo, I have a little card that he sent me with this food photo on it, but it's much nicer to have a bigger photo.
Pardon me, Anne? This was hanging on the back of your chair when you left.
Oh yeah,
this morning.
that's my shoe strap.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, if I'm going to be playing for any length of time, I know.
Yes, I am. I wish it hadn't rained at all. But I could, after all that.
Oh yeah.
Why was this done? I mean, is it like an actor's thing?
I met.
All right.
After I met her. Yeah, I would love to have a sort of the Elizabethan pronunciation.
Yeah, the BFA.
Part about the workshop in the woods was teaching kids to insult each other.
Yeah, yes.
Memorial.
Thank you, and thank you guys so much for doing that. You were all up the hill, and I said thanks to Deer Creek for doing that.
Our pleasure.
Exactly what I wanted in my friend. Exactly the way you wanted.
It was fine. No, we did. Oh, no, we actually do it in all sorts of different ways. So.
No, that was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Kimberly and I will not be coming.
It was a rose.
Okay,
So thank you.
we'll see you another time.
Yeah, I hope so.
Hi, Ann. My name is Marion. We might have met at some point. Dick and I were partly about 40 years ago. Long time ago. Thank you. I could do something. Communing with kind of like. I think I might have just moved on to art